What happens when the world's most powerful man, one who revolutionized industries and changed the course of technology, is humiliated in a courtroom? Imagine this. Elon Musk, the name that resonates with billions, the man who took on giants, and won, sitting in front of a judge who publicly insults him, a man who's become synonymous with innovation, power, and wealth, now facing ridicule. What would his response be? Would he cower in defeat? Or would he show the world the kind of resilience only the boldest possess? This wasn't just any courtroom exchange. It was a high-stakes moment that seemed impossible. Elon Musk, seated with the weight of the world's attention on him, insulted by a judge, a figure of authority. A courtroom usually designed for legal discourse turned into an arena for public humiliation. But what they didn't know, the judge, the spectators, and the media, was that they had just awakened a force greater than they could imagine. As the judge's words echoed, Musk sat there, calm and composed, the pressure mounting, but his face unreadable. The insults, the mockery, none of it seemed to faze him. It was clear he wasn't the kind of man to take a blow without responding. And then, in a moment that would forever change the perception of this encounter, Musk did the unthinkable. He didn't bow his head. He didn't let it slide. Instead, he crafted a response that would shake the very foundation of the courtroom. His response was not just epic. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't through legal systems or courts, but through the silent and calculated strength of an individual who's learned to never underestimate the underdog. It wasn't just about winning the case anymore. It was about something deeper, something profound. Elon Musk had taken the insult and, with a simple yet explosive move, flipped the power dynamic completely on its head. The world waited. The room fell silent. And what Musk did next would make every courtroom drama pale in comparison. A response that would forever be etched in history as one of the most brilliant moments of retaliation the world had ever seen. The judge may have thought he held the power, but Musk's retort? That was an act of pure genius. Stay tuned, because the moment that followed was nothing short of legendary. The courtroom was packed, but it wasn't the usual buzz of lawyers arguing over legal points. No, this was a spectacle, a one-of-a-kind, drama playing out, the kind that would later be discussed at every dinner table across social media and on news networks for days to come. The reason? Elon Musk, a man who had turned the world of tech and space exploration upside down, was sitting across from a judge who had made it his mission to publicly demean him. Elon wasn't just any defendant in this courtroom. He was the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and a host of other companies that had redefined entire industries. His name was synonymous with innovation, with audacity, with a fearlessness that had made him billions and cemented him as one of the most influential figures of the modern era. And yet, here he was, just another man in a suit, facing the wrath of a judge who thought it was his moment to strike a blow against the man who had become the symbol of Silicon Valley's power. The judge, a man with a reputation for being tough on high-profile individuals, seemed to think his position gave him the right to belittle those who appeared before him. He was an authority figure, a man who prided himself on cracking down on what he perceived as the arrogance of the powerful. But this wasn't just a legal battle. This was about ego, a power struggle that transcended the legal arguments. The judge wanted to make an example out of Musk, to show that no one, not even the most powerful tech moguls, could walk into his courtroom and get away without feeling the sting of his authority. And Musk, to put it bluntly, was the perfect target. Here was a man who had made headlines for almost every conceivable reason, from launching rockets into space to sending electric cars roaring down highways. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a living symbol of the new age, the kind of person whose actions sparked entire industries to rethink what was possible. In many ways, he had become untouchable, a titan who had shaped the future, but also a figure who had amassed his fair share of detractors. So when this judge insulted Musk in front of a packed courtroom, it wasn't just an attack on a man. It was an attack on the very idea of what Musk represented. The powerful, those who dared to dream big, those who reshaped industries with their boldness. How dare they think they were above the law? Musk was a symbol, but not just for the good he had done. He was also a reminder to many that power, when unchecked, could become a force of chaos and destruction, and some were determined to knock him off his pedestal. It wasn't just Musk who felt the sting of the judge's words. It was every entrepreneur, every visionary, and every person who had ever dared to chase a dream, no matter how impossible it seemed. The judge wasn't just putting Musk down. He was sending a message to the world, a message that said, the dreamers, the rebels, the ones who dare to challenge the norm, they are not safe. We will not let them rise above the rest. And that was where the injustice truly lay. It wasn't just about one man's reputation. It was about the larger narrative of power and the way society tends to view those who step outside the expected boundaries. In many ways, the world had already made Musk an outlier, someone who was so far ahead of the curve that he was almost beyond reproach. But in this moment, the court of law, in the form of this single judge, sought to remind Musk that no one, not even the kings of Silicon Valley, were above reproach. The unfairness festered, as it always does when a power imbalance is laid bare. Musk had spent years building something monumental, transforming industries and redefining what was possible. Yet here he was, being reduced to just another man who could be insulted without consequence. The system, which should have been a place for justice, was now a battleground for egos. Musk wasn't just facing legal charges. He was facing the weight of an unjust world that seemed determined to tear down anyone who dared to rise too high. This wasn't just a man against a judge. It was the story of every underdog who had ever felt small in the face of something bigger and more oppressive, and the public was eating it up. Headlines flashed across screens, sensationalizing the courtroom clash as though it were a gladiatorial combat. On one side, the judge, upholding the law, bringing down a man who represented everything people loved to hate about the tech elite. On the other, Musk, the embodiment of Silicon Valley's rebellious spirit, its defiance of convention. The world watched in fascination as the battle for dominance played out in real time. What was the cost of all of this? The judge had proven his point. Musk was not untouchable. But the real question was, at what price? Was it justice to insult a man who had built his fortune and influence through sheer ingenuity and hard work? Was it fair to knock someone down because they had achieved something extraordinary? To the public, it seemed like a show of power. But to Musk, this wasn't just an insult. It was the product of a system that had long favored conformity over innovation, punishment over progress. And, as the tension in the courtroom thickened, it became clear that this wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a clash of worldviews. The world had seen what Musk could do when he faced adversity. He didn't buckle. He didn't back down. He found a way to turn every setback into a stepping stone. But this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just a business deal gone wrong. This wasn't just another lawsuit. This was a battle for respect, for dignity, and for the very idea of what it means to be powerful in a world that often seems determined to keep you in your place. The injustice wasn't just that Musk had been insulted. The injustice was that he, and so many others like him, had become symbols of something much larger than themselves. They weren't just fighting for their companies or their futures. They were fighting for a future where the underdog could rise, where innovation was rewarded, and where those with power didn't get to decide who could dream and who couldn't. And the world was watching, waiting for Musk to respond. Musk's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white beneath the pressure. The courtroom felt smaller now, the walls creeping in, suffocating. He had expected a tough fight, yes, but not this. Not this brutal public humiliation. It was a harsh blow to his pride, a reminder that no matter how high you climbed, someone always had the power to pull you back down. The judge's words had stung, not because they were true, but because they felt like a personal attack, a slap to everything Musk had fought for. His mind raced as he sat there, trying to hold on to his composure. His reputation was on the line. The eyes of the world were upon him. People who once admired him now watched with a growing sense of disbelief, wondering if this was the moment Musk had finally met his match. They'd seen him rise from the ashes before, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just about his companies or his wealth. This was about his identity. For the first time in a long time, Musk wondered whether he could win this battle. The court, a place that should have been about justice, had instead become a spectacle. The judge had already made it clear that he didn't respect Musk, that he didn't care about the man behind the empire. This was just another fight, another example of how the powerful were constantly being torn down in a system that seemed to serve only itself. And yet something inside Musk stirred, a flicker of defiance. It wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated. It wasn't the first time people had tried to put him in his place. The early days of Tesla were filled with moments where the odds seemed stacked against him. When the electric car industry was dismissed as a joke, when the idea of a private space company was seen as absurd. Each time Musk had found a way to rise again. He couldn't afford to lose now, not this time. He leaned back in his chair, momentarily closing his eyes. The weight of the situation seemed to collapse on his shoulders, threatening to drown him. The thought of walking away, of just letting it all go, tempted him. What did he have left to prove? He had built everything from nothing. He had revolutionized the automotive industry and space exploration. He had created the impossible. But this was different. The injustice was too great, too personal. His name, his legacy, was at risk. And as he sat there, feeling the world, close in, he remembered something. A conversation with a friend years ago, back when he was trying to get his first investors to take Tesla seriously. He had been told that he was crazy, that he was out of his mind. The world laughed at his vision, but he didn't back down. If he had, the electric car revolution might never have happened. His entire career was built on defying the odds, on proving the impossible was possible. A thought flickered in his mind. Was this just another moment where he could rise above the naysayers? Or was it different this time? Would the system, this deeply entrenched system that had always worked against the dreamers, finally succeed in breaking him? He could feel his resolve shifting. The anger he had felt earlier began to morph into something more powerful, something stronger. He wasn't going to let the judge, or anyone else, decide his fate. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much. This wasn't just about his reputation. This was about proving something to the world, that no matter what, no one, no matter how powerful, could strip away his integrity. As the minutes ticked by, Musk made a decision. A critical one. He wasn't going to let this moment be defined by the judge. He would define it. He wasn't going to stoop to the level of retaliation or bitterness. He was going to show the world that strength didn't come from yelling the loudest or sinking to petty insults. His strength, his power, came from his ability to rise above it all, to keep moving forward no matter the obstacle. It wasn't about winning the case anymore. It wasn't about beating the judge in the traditional sense. This was about a different kind of victory. The victory of not letting the world take away his dignity. The room grew quiet as the judge spoke again, but Musk was no longer listening to the words. He was listening to the voice inside his head, the one that had guided him through every challenge. And in that moment, he realized that the true power lay not in getting even, but in showing everyone that no matter what they threw at him, he would always rise. Always. He straightened his posture, his eyes narrowing with a new sense of purpose. The weight of the moment had shifted. The pressure he had felt was gone, replaced by a calm confidence that radiated from within. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The world was waiting for him to respond, waiting for him to make a move. And Musk knew, deep down, that whatever he did next would echo far beyond this courtroom. It would set a precedent. It would send a message to everyone who had ever been held back, ridiculed, or pushed aside. Never give up. Never let anyone define your worth. As the judge prepared to speak once more, Musk was ready to show them all that the real power wasn't in the insults. It was in how you responded. And the world was about to witness one of the most epic comebacks in history. The courtroom fell into a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. All eyes were on Elon Musk as he sat at the table, the weight of the world's scrutiny pressing down on him. The judge had just delivered his final insult, and for a moment it seemed like the scales of justice were tipped firmly in the judge's favor. The humiliation had reached its peak, and the public was left wondering, how would Musk respond? Was this the end of his reign? The moment when the unstoppable force had finally been stopped? But as the judge looked down at his notes, preparing to move on, something extraordinary happened. Musk stood up. It wasn't just the act of standing, it was the way he stood. Calm, collected, unshaken. It was as though, in that very moment, the entire courtroom could feel the shift. The atmosphere, once charged with tension, began to buzz with a different energy. It was the kind of stillness that preceded a storm, quiet, ominous, but undeniably powerful. Elon Musk wasn't looking at the judge anymore. His gaze was fixed on the crowd, his eyes sweeping across the room, taking in the faces of those who had been waiting for his downfall. He wasn't just speaking to the judge now. He was speaking to the world, the media, the public, the millions who had followed his career from the very beginning. They all held their breath, waiting for the next words to escape his mouth. "Know what you're all thinking?" Musk began, his voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "You think I'm done? You think this is the end of the road for me? Well, you're wrong." The judge, who had been sitting back, clearly enjoying the satisfaction of watching Musk squirm, was momentarily caught off guard. He had expected resistance, sure, but not this. Musk wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He was calm, in control. And suddenly it was clear to everyone in the room that the real power wasn't with the judge, it was with Musk. "I've been through worse," Musk continued, his voice steady, unwavering. "People have doubted me from the beginning. The car industry said electric vehicles were a joke. The space industry said private companies could never compete with NASA. And yet here we are. Tesla's the leader in electric cars, and SpaceX is sending rockets to the International Space Station." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The courtroom was hanging on every syllable now. "But, you know, what?" Musk went on, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "None of that would have happened if I had listened to people like you. If I had let people like you tell me what I could or couldn't do." The judge bristled. He had expected Musk to back down, to apologize, to grovel. But Musk wasn't apologizing. Instead, he was doing what he did best, defying the expectations of the world. And in that moment, the true power dynamic began to shift. It wasn't the judge who had control anymore. Musk had taken it back, without raising his voice, without a single act of aggression. He had taken control with the quiet, unyielding confidence that had propelled him to the top in the first place. Musk's words began to sink in. The judge's expression faltered, his smugness slowly replaced with confusion. What had he just heard? The man who had been at the center of so much mockery and derision was now standing tall, refusing to be broken. He wasn't just responding to the insults. He was revealing something far more dangerous. The truth. The truth was that Musk had never been the one who was powerless in this situation. The truth was that this courtroom, this entire charade, was built on a foundation of hypocrisy. For years, Musk had been a lightning rod for every type of criticism. He had been demonized for his ambition, vilified for his unorthodox ways, and yet, he had kept pushing forward. And now, in this moment, he was reminding everyone of that unrelenting drive. "I've built companies from scratch," Musk continued, his voice gaining momentum. "I've faced bankruptcy, skepticism, and failure at every turn. And yet, here I am, still standing." His eyes locked onto the judge's, his gaze unwavering. "You think you can break me with words? With insults? I've been through far worse." The tension in the courtroom had shifted completely. What had begun as a moment of public ridicule had transformed into something else entirely. Musk wasn't fighting for his reputation anymore. He wasn't fighting for his businesses. He was fighting for something more profound. His dignity, his legacy, his refusal to let anyone, no matter how powerful, strip him of what he had built. And that's when it happened. The judge's authority, which had seemed so unshakable moments ago, began to crumble. His earlier smugness, his belief that he could control the room, began to dissolve. Musk wasn't playing by the rules anymore. He wasn't simply answering questions or responding to insults. He was exposing the truth for what it was. The judge's position of power was an illusion, a mask that was now slipping off. Musk had something the judge didn't: the unassailable truth of his actions. The judge might have had legal authority, but Musk had the weight of his accomplishments, his perseverance, and his refusal to be held down. Musk wasn't just a businessman or a CEO. He was a symbol of defiance against a world that loved to tear down those who rose too high. The judge looked around the courtroom, his expression faltering as he realized the shift that had taken place. The audience, who had once sided with the judge, now began to look at Musk with a new respect. They had witnessed something incredible, something few had ever seen. A public figure, one who had been humiliated, had taken that humiliation and turned it into a rallying cry. Musk wasn't done yet. He wasn't finished exposing the hypocrisy of the system. "You know," he said, his voice now resonating with a quiet power, "I'm not here for your approval. I didn't build Tesla or SpaceX or anything else for your approval. I did it because I believe in something bigger. I believe in a future where the impossible becomes possible." And just like that, the power had shifted. The tables had turned, and the judge, once so sure of his position, was left standing in the rubble of his own arrogance. Musk had revealed the truth, and in doing so, had proven that no one, not even the most powerful figures in the system, could break him. The courtroom remained still, a heavy silence hanging in the air. Everyone, from the media to the spectators, was waiting for the next move. Musk stood tall, his calm demeanor now more imposing than ever. He hadn't just taken back control, he had redefined the entire situation. He had made it clear that the insults, the belittlement, the power play of the courtroom had no effect on him. What everyone had underestimated, what the judge had failed to see, was that Musk wasn't someone you could just break down with words. He was someone who had been shaped by adversity, who had built his empire on the foundation of proving people wrong. The judge, once confident in his position, now found himself fighting to maintain his composure. The smugness that had initially marked his face was replaced by uncertainty. He glanced around, his eyes meeting those of the other people in the room, but no one seemed to share his earlier sense of superiority. The moment was slipping away from him. He had miscalculated. Musk hadn't been broken by his insults, he had been emboldened. Musk wasn't looking for revenge. He wasn't playing the same game the judge had set up for him. Instead, Musk had done something far more powerful. He had let the judge expose himself. In trying to break Musk, the judge had revealed his own weaknesses. The arrogance, the assumption of control, the belief that the law was a weapon to wield rather than a tool for justice, and that in the end would be his downfall. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to regain some of the authority that had slipped away from him. "Mr. Musk," he began, but the words felt hollow, almost rehearsed. The room was no longer listening to him. The people in the gallery, the press, the lawyers, everyone was focused on Musk, not the man who had tried to humble him. It was then that the shocking twist unfolded. Musk, as if sensing the final shift, turned to face the judge once more. "You've made it clear what you think of me," Musk said, his voice unwavering, but with a sharp edge of finality. "But you've also made it clear that you believe. Your position gives you the right to destroy anyone who dares to challenge your authority, and that's the problem." The judge opened his mouth, but Musk wasn't finished. "You're not just a judge. You're a symbol of everything that's wrong with a system that believes power means control. That people like me, people who dare to be different, are there for the taking. But I've made my fortune proving people like you wrong." His eyes burned with intensity now, his words cutting deeper than anyone expected. "And the irony is that you've just shown the world exactly why that's true." With that, Musk turned away from the bench, facing the media who had been reporting on this moment as if it were just another spectacle. But to Musk, it wasn't about the cameras, the headlines, or the noise. This was about something far more personal. The judge, in his attempt to break Musk, had actually exposed his own flaws. His ego, his thirst for power, and now the tables were turned. The courtroom went quiet as the judge hesitated. His position was untenable. The power he once had was slipping through his fingers. The world wasn't going to side with him after this moment. They had seen Musk's strength, his calm under pressure. They had seen the truth exposed, and it was a truth that could not be undone. The judge's authority was no longer absolute. The people in the room could feel it. They had watched as the most powerful man in the room had taken control, not by force, but by sheer will, by the clarity of his message, and by the quiet dignity that had carried him through countless challenges. The judge had thought his words would be enough to crush Musk's spirit, but in the end it was his own words that had led to his undoing. Musk didn't need to make any grand gestures. He didn't need to shout, to call for revenge, or to drag the judge through any public trial. He had already won. Not because he had beaten the judge in some legal sense, but because he had exposed a truth that was undeniable. The law was never meant to be a weapon against the powerless. It was meant to uphold justice, and in that moment the judge had lost sight of that. As the judge stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control, Musk turned to his legal team, his face softening for the first time since the confrontation began. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had stayed true to who he was, even in the face of humiliation. Musk's victory wasn't just a legal one. It was a moral one. He had shown the world that no matter how powerful a figure might seem, no matter how much control they appeared to wield, they could never take away a person's dignity, their strength, or their belief in what was right. And, as Musk left the courtroom, the whispers began. People began to speak in hushed tones about what had just transpired. The headlines began to shift. Musk had faced a public humiliation, but what he had done in response would be remembered as one of the most poetic acts of justice in recent history. Karma, as they say, had a way of balancing the scales. The judge, once so confident in his power, was left to grapple with the consequences of his actions. His reputation was now tarnished, his authority questioned, and the world had seen him for what he truly was, a man who had tried to use his position to tear down someone who had done more for the world than he ever would. Elon Musk didn't need to seek revenge. He didn't need to strike back, because in that moment he had already received the one thing that mattered most: respect, from the people, from the world, and most importantly, from himself. He didn't need to make a show of it. He didn't need to humiliate the judge in return. The justice had already been served. The judge had lost everything: the public's respect, his credibility, and his sense of control, while Musk walked away with something far greater: his dignity, his integrity, and a powerful message that would echo through history. No one, no matter how powerful, could ever silence those who believed in themselves and in the truth. And that, in the end, was the sweetest kind of justice.